data on our archaeological resources on a regular basis, and information on over 140,000 monuments across the country is currently stored in the Department's Sites and Monuments record. The National Monuments Acts allow me to place a preservation order Lascan Corla on any other important archaeological site or monument that may be at risk, and as such there is an extensive protection, as I outlined, for archaeological heritage in the state without a need for acquisition of sites, except, as I said, in the most exceptional of cases. An acquisition of the whole of High Island would require considerable resource commitment, not just on the part of the Department, but also on the Office of Public Works. And whether or not the island is privately owned, my department will continue to protect the national monument there as it stands. And furthermore, it should be said as well that access to the island is also extremely difficult, and any acquisition would therefore bring very little benefit in terms of visitor access to the monuments there. Thank you, Lascan Corla.
Thank you. Now we move on to the next topical, and it's Deputy Dáil O'Brien, who has 4 minutes to make his case. Or less.
Gormago de Lascan Corla. And I see Minister English has taken this. Minister, you may be aware that Irish Water and the Government are proposing to locate a regional sewage plant on a 50-acre site at Clonshock in North County Dublin. And this is a planned €1 billion development. It's 4 times the size of Croke Park, with an outflow pipe located off Portmarnock through a special area of conservation at the Baldoyle-Portmarnock estuary. According to the plans that are submitted and are within Borpin, sewage will only be treated to the minimum secondary level. And at the very least, what I and the 14,000 residents and my colleague Deputy Sean Haughey and Councillor Owen O'Brien would insist upon is that the highest modern levels of treatment are applied. I do note that the size of the plant has been reduced from about 800,000 to 900,000 PE personal equivalent to 500,000 person equivalent, and I think this has been down to the fact that there have been over 14,000 observations through the public consultation process, which has actually been useful. Also, during a recent meeting that I held with Irish Water in June of last year, I was actually informed that the priority now for Irish Water is the continuing upgrade of the Ringsend facility to bring new technologies in there and to increase capacity. And I'm wondering if you have an update on that. But specifically, what I'm asking here is that whilst I and residents are particularly opposed to this type of development, because we believe this series of localised plants is the way forward. We have 15 plants already in Fingal that you process the waste where it is actually generated, and that we don't go down this road of a 1.4, anything between 1 billion and 1.4 billion of an orbital sewer with a massive regional wastewater treatment plant. And really, that's what our main objections would be. Firstly, on the grounds of environmental damage and potential damage there, quality of life for residents in Clonshock and Portmarnock and the surrounding areas, also the fishing industry that's there, the horticultural sector. But the cost to the taxpayer is fundamental. I've been asking time and time again for a cost-benefit analysis in this project, and actually, well before you assumed the role of Minister for State, I actually asked who was Minister Brendan Howlin at the time, as Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, to carry out a cost-benefit analysis on this, and he'd actually promised that that would be done. Now, my understanding is that that has not been done. But really, with the purpose of asking Minister Murphy this question, I know he's not here today, but I am glad you are, because you're within the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, is to inform the House what has been spent to date on this project. And I think that's important, that we keep an eye on large capital projects. I think your government will understand how important that is when you take into account the debacle of the National Children's Hospital. We want to ensure that whatever happens with the development of additional wastewater treatment plant facilities in the area, be they the large regional ones, which we don't support, but the smaller localised ones that would serve 80,000 to 90,000 person equivalent and those areas, that we have a handle on the costs. So I would be greatly obliged if you could advise what has been spent to date, what the government's plans are insofar as the 2019 to 2024 Irish Water Strategic Funding Plan. Have you allocated further funding to bring this plant to construction? bearing in mind that An Bord Pleanála have granted residents, myself, Deputy Haughey and Councillors Owen O'Brien and Sean Paul Mahon, an oral hearing on the 20th of March. But I just want to try to get a handle on where the costs are at so far, what allocation and capital funding has been made for this year, and if you have figures into next.
Ministers, 4 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Curl. I'll try and answer some of the questions you've raised. I won't have all the detail you've asked for because some of the issues you've raised are a little bit different to what you initially proposed, but I have no problem in getting further information for you. And if we need to organise a meeting with Irish Water, with ourselves, I'm happy to do that too, because we're happy to, it's an open book and then have that space. So I want to thank Deputy O'Brien for raising this issue. The Greater Dublin Region project involves the development of a new regional wastewater treatment facility and associated drainage infrastructure to serve the growing population of the North Dublin area. The current estimated cost of delivering the project is in the region of 500 million over the life cycle of the project, including the planning stage. I don't have a breakdown of all those costs for you. I know you want the initial costs so far in planning and so on. I don't have them for you. I can try and get them for you at a later stage. Since the 1st of January 2014, Irish Water has statutory responsibility for all aspects of water services planning, delivery and operation at national, regional and local level. Irish Water, as a single national water service authority, takes a strategic nationwide approach to assist planning and investment and meeting customer requirements. Irish Water delivers its services in accordance with the Water Service Strategic Plan published in October 2015. This sets out a high-level strategy over 25 years to ensure the provision of clean, safe drinking water, effective management of wastewater, environmental protection and support for economic and social development. The first National Water Services Policy Statement, prepared in line with the Water Services Act, which Minister Murphy launched on the 21st of May 2018, outlines a clear direction to strategic planning and decision-making on water and wastewater services in Ireland. It identifies key policy objectives and priorities for the delivery of water and wastewater services in Ireland over the period to 2025. It provides a context within which necessary funding and investment plans by Irish Water are framed and agreed. On the 7th of November 2018, Minister Murphy approved Irish Water's Strategic Funding Plan 2019-2024, which sets out Irish Water's multi-annual strategic funding requirement of 11 billion to 2024. This comprises 6.1 billion investment in infrastructure and assets and 4.9 billion in operating costs. This significant multi-billion euro investment programme is to ensure the continued operation, repair and upgrading of the country's water and wastewater infrastructure to support social and economic development across the state and continued care of the water environment. Irish Water's Strategic Funding Plan is also subject to economic regulatory review by the Commission for Regulation of Utilities, the CRU, who will consider the efficiency of its investment proposals. The Strategic Funding Plan sets out the financial plan for capital investments to support Irish Water's strategic objectives in order to deliver improvements to water services. I understand from Irish Water that they have made an application for strategic infrastructure development for the Greater Dublin Drainage Project to An Bord Pleanála on the 20th of June 2018. An Bord Pleanála then held a period of statutory public consultation. It is anticipated that the Board will commence an oral hearing on the project shortly, and I gather you have been involved in that process as well and are participating fully as well on that. You do reference the cost-benefit analysis. I presume that will be certainly part of an oral hearing discussion, because generally when you're bringing forward these projects you have to prove the alternative options, and that goes down to the cost and environmental and so on. So I would imagine that will be dealt with there, but I'll certainly pursue that further for you as well in the meantime and get you any information I can on that too.
Thank you, Deputy. 2 minutes.
Thanks, Minister. Just and knowing that you're not the direct line minister for this project, so I say this respectfully, that the question itself hasn't been answered at all. What I've looked for is the costs incurred to date, and I think the Dáil should receive answers to that as members here, and that we should, particularly in large capital projects like this, and this is the only cost I was ever able to get or estimate was in the region of 1 to 1.4 billion. That's a lot of money. It may not be, but we need to get a handle on what costs are being incurred to date, and that's really what I want to get to. I remain absolutely opposed to this type of development, and I really do believe that government need to go back and look at what they've proposed. This proposal is 4, 5, 6 years in existence. It's proposing to treat waste to the very basic standard of secondary, not tertiary treatment. And actually the model itself in what we're proceeding with is flawed. And certainly so do thousands of residents in the area, and they don't approach this from a not in my backyard position. They're approaching this in a position of residents who have 15 wastewater treatment plants in the area, and that this waste is effectively to become a treatment plant for all the waste in the Greater Dublin area, to be piped in an orbital sewer around the M50 and to be piped into a wastewater treatment plant at Clonshaugh, a 50-acre site, and then out through a special area conservation from the Dáil estuary. You actually couldn't really make it up if you planned it now. You wouldn't plan this now. And that's why I'm calling for a real cost-benefit analysis and to halt now and look at it before we have a situation like has happened in St James's, where the state runs away with itself and wastes 1.4, 1.5 billion. That's not actually required. So could I ask you, Minister, to ask of officials within your department in Irish Water to give us the exact spend to date on this project, and what is the estimated cost of delivery of this project? Thank you.
Thank you for observing the time. Minister, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, again, Deputy, I'm conscious that you were probably chatting to the asking caller when I outlined. I don't have the actual planning cost to look for today at this moment in time, because what happens here, they're given an envelope of funding to deliver this project, and that's monitored through the Irish Water's own strategic plan, which is presented to the government and so on, but also to the regulator. And I know from dealing with the regulator on different utility organisations that would have put forward proposals over the years, the regulators are fairly strict when it comes to costs and monitor them quite well, and very often reduce the initial asking costs as well. So there's a fairly good system and protocol there to deal with that too. Likewise, but again, it just figures there you're looking for, I'll see if I can get them for you from Irish Water. They are the body responsible for this. It's not something we do on a day-to-day basis. Now it's Irish Water, that statutory responsibility for the planning and that decision making around the type of approach to go forward. But you raise issues there of questioning, is it the best way to treat a treatment facility? That's something we can certainly look into for you. I'm not familiar with the details of that at this moment in time, but I'll certainly get that, because I've raised my interest in it now anyway, to be honest with you. But certainly, again, that is also part of the planning process that they're going through, and I have been at many of these oral hearings over the years. This detail will be dealt with and will come out, and it's an important part of a decision-making process. Because very often, of a project of this nature, the first question is you have to prove, is it necessary, and can you do it some other way, and it's another better way. Irish Water will be given the job to effectively use taxpayers' money to have the best treatment facility to the highest standards within a certain budget as well, and to manage that too, and to get value for money as well as the best environmental decisions. So I presume that will all be teased out now during the oral hearing and the planning process. But certainly, if there's any information I can get for you in the meantime, we'll do that. I'm happy to do that for you as well.
Thank you. We now move on to the next topical, and it's Deputy Michael McGrath, who's 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Lasca and Corla. Minister of State Stanton, I assume you're taking this. Being a Cork deputy, you'll be familiar with the constituency I represent, Cork South Central, which is primarily an urban constituency, taking in the south side of Cork City and some very large suburbs which are growing rapidly, such as Douglas, Carrickmacross and Passage West. The Garda District HQ is in Toker. It is the only 24-hour station in our Garda district, and when the other Garda stations in the district are closed, which happens to be most of the time, then all phone calls are diverted to Toker Garda station. Stations in the other densely populated parts of the constituency, such as Carrickmacross and Douglas, have very limited opening hours. The stations are not always open, even during the designated hours when they are meant to be open, because the Gardaí who are on duty and who are meant to be in the station are called away. And they're called away to an incident elsewhere in the district. The general public do draw confidence, Minister, from a station being open, ideally on a 24/7 basis. Garda management will often tell me that they prefer to use the resources for patrolling rather than having Gardaí within the station. And that is an operational decision for Garda management, which I accept. But I absolutely believe that we need longer station opening hours within Toker district in those main populated areas, those suburbs I spoke about. So in the area I represent, Minister, we have had a spate of burglaries. We have had organised gangs roaming through housing estates, checking if cars are unlocked, and if they are unlocked, they are stealing whatever they can from those cars. We have had damage to private property and indeed to public property, such as playgrounds in the area as well. Lots of people have captured on their own private CCTV systems people trying to open their vehicles, people walking around the side or the back of their homes, and following a serious assault on the main street of Carrickmacross last Saturday night, where a man was seriously injured, and I wish him well in his recovery. Many people have been in touch, and they've been in touch expressing real concern and real worry about the lack of a Garda presence in the area, Minister. Garda management will openly tell me that they simply do not have the resources for foot patrols. The days of Gardaí walking along the street, certainly in my area and perhaps elsewhere around the country, seem to be gone. In Carrickmacross, where I live, we have one community Garda who is very visible. He's out and about a lot. The other Gardaí simply do not have the time or the resources to do so. They are stretched to breaking point, and that has had a direct impact on morale within the force, Minister. Resources are the key issue. And if you take Carrickmacross as an example, where I live, we have 5 units of 2 members each, so 2 members in each unit. We have 3 detective Gardaí and 3 sergeants. So on any given weekend night, you could have a situation where you have 1 unit of 2 Gardaí serving the town. And the reality is that they could be called away at any point in time, and frequently are, to any other part of the Garda district to deal with an incident that occurs. So you could have actually no Garda presence within the town at any point in time. So we absolutely need longer station opening hours, and we need more Gardaí. People shouldn't have to call to a Garda station on multiple occasions to get a form signed, and that is the practice what's happening in my area. My area is an area of high population growth, a rapidly expanding area, Minister, and I understand that there is a new policing divisional model being prepared, and extra resources have been requested for that area by Garda management. And I'm asking you, as the Minister here in the House responsible today, to take up that issue with Garda management, the top brass within the Gardaí, and deliver those extra resources to this area.
Thank you. Mr. Stanton.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Again, I want to thank the Deputy for raising this matter, and I must apologise for the Minister for Justice and Equality, who is spending a lot of time in the Shannon at the moment on the Judicial Appointments Commission bill. So he asked me to stand in because he wasn't sure if he could make it, and he didn't want to delay proceedings. He has asked me to reiterate to the House that, with regard to the deployment of Garda resources, including personnel, to specific areas, that the Deputy and others will appreciate that it is solely, and I mean solely, the responsibility of the Garda Commissioner and his management team. I think we'll all appreciate that we cannot interfere with that decision in any way. The Commissioner has publicly spoken about issues like protecting our most vulnerable, and he has highlighted that his priority is a policing model which will provide the best outcomes for communities. The distribution of Garda resources is constantly monitored, and a distribution model is used that takes into account all relevant factors, including population, crime trends and overall policing needs at local level. It is then a matter for the Divisional Police Chief Superintendent to determine the optimum distribution of duties among the personnel available to him or her, having regard to the profile of the area and its specific needs. This applies equally as in both rural and urban areas, and I am sure that the Commissioner will be noting this debate here this evening anyway, and his management team. I would also emphasise that it is not appropriate to simply determine the allocation of Garda resources on the basis of population size alone, as it fails to take account of, among other things, the fact that crime levels and types can vary significantly in communities of similar population size. The Deputy will appreciate that an increase in the opening hours of any Garda station would necessitate the deployment of additional Garda personnel on indoor administrative duties, who may be more effectively employed on outdoor policing duties. And the Deputy has actually alluded to that point himself in his contribution earlier. The Minister has advised that the matter of opening hours of sub-district stations is subject to continual review and alteration by Garda management in the context of policing priorities and resources available. The Commissioner has informed the Minister that on the 31st of January 2019, the latest date for which figures are readily available, the strength of the Cork City Division was 703, with 128 Gardaí assigned to the Topical Garda district. There are also 38 Garda reserves and 80 civilians attached to the division. When appropriate, the work of local Gardaí is supported by a number of Garda national units, such as the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the Armed Support Units, the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau and the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau. Since the reopening of the Garda College in September 2014, almost 2,400 recruits have attested as members of Garda Síochána and have been assigned to mainstream duties nationwide, of whom 62 were assigned to the Cork City Division, including 15 probationary Garda assigned to Topical Garda Station. The Commissioner has informed the Minister that it is his intention to recruit a total of 600 trainee Gardaí in 2019, along with a net 600 Garda staff The recruitment of these additional Garda staff will allow the Commissioner to redeploy this year a further 500 fully trained Gardaí from administrative duties to the frontline duties for which they are trained. The injection of this large number of experienced officers into the field, along with new recruits, will be really beneficial in terms of protecting communities. Furthermore, the Commissioner has been provided with an additional €100 million in 2019, bringing his total budget to almost €1.8 billion. This substantial investment will allow the accelerated recruitment programme to continue, in tandem with the deployment of new and leading-edge technology to support our frontline Gardaí in carrying out their work of delivering a visible, effective and responsive police service to communities across all Garda divisions, including the Cork City Division in 2019 and further years. Thank you.
Yeah, Minister, thank you for your reply. And just looking at the figures you have provided, I mean, you're saying that 2,400 new recruits qualified since September 2014, of which 62 were assigned to the Cork City Division. So this is the division representing the second largest city in our state. And 62 out of 2,400 is less than 3% of the newly qualified Gardaí have been assigned to the whole division of Cork City, which includes the Toker district, and that includes places like Douglas, Carrickmacross and elsewhere. So we're not getting our fair share. Let's be honest about it. And you say, Minister, that the allocation of resources is solely a matter for the Garda Commissioner. We recently had the Minister for Justice visiting West Cork, surrounded by Fine Gael Oireachtas members, Fine Gael councillors. We had announcements by your colleagues of the reopening of Ballinspittle, that Kinsale Station will be manned 24/7, all coinciding with your visit. So the reality is the Minister acts hand in glove with the Garda Commissioner, and there is a tie-in there, and there's no doubt whatsoever about that. Gardaí who have been assigned to the Toker district tell me that they are shocked when they compare it with the resources elsewhere, at the very limited resources in that area. There's no doubt about it. The Toker district, which includes those very large suburbs, is not getting a fair deal in relation to resources. And there is a very real concern, Minister, and I'm glad you're here for the end of the debate. There's a very real concern within those communities. And you might say you hear this everywhere, but go and check it out. And I will assure you, you will find that that district is not getting the resources it should be. And yes, population is not the only determinant, I accept that, but it is certainly a significant factor. This is an area of very rapid population growth, suburbs that are growing very, very quickly. We need more Garda visibility. We simply don't have it. And what I would ask you, Minister, is will you at least convey these views to the Garda Commissioner, so that when he is making decisions in respect of the allocation of resources, that these points will be taken on board.
Minister Stanton.
I can assure the Deputy that the Commissioner notes what happens in these houses relating to the Garda Síochána, and his management team are very concerned about any requests that are made here and take those into account. I can also assure the Deputy that work with communities to tackle public disorder and reducing antisocial behaviour remains a key priority for the Garda Síochána. Clearly, Garda visibility is very important, and the Government remains committed to ensuring a strong and visible police presence throughout the country in order to maintain and strengthen community engagement, provide reassurance to citizens and to deter crime. The Joint Policing Committees have a big role to play in this as well, and they facilitate consultation and cooperation and discussion, and they bring matters to the attention of Gardaí at a high level locally, and also local authorities and elected local representatives. And I think that this active and constructive engagement is very important and should be encouraged and supported. At the heart of the concerns expressed by the Deputy is the relationship between the communities and the local Gardaí, and that's very, very important. The programme for partnership government underlines the importance of community policing in responding to the concerns and expectation about urban and rural communities. The Government is fully committed to implementing that commitment, and over the last few years, as I said, unprecedented resources have been made available, ensuring that the Commissioner and his management team have the resources necessary to deliver a modern policing service to our communities throughout the country, including the Toker district. But rest assured that the Garda Síochána will have noted the debate this evening, as they note all these debates, and will make their decisions independently as they are mandated to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. We move now to the fourth important issue. It's in the names of Deputies Donegal Éireann, Thomas Brune, Gino Kenny and Niamh Smyth. Wish to discuss, again with the Minister for Justice and Equality, the need for a public inquiry into the death of Shane O'Farrell. Deputy O'Leary, we've 1 minute each.
I'll be as direct as possible.
I think it's been clearly demonstrated that Shane O'Farrell was failed by multiple arms of the state in terms of justice agencies. And his tragic death was, I believe, avoidable had those agencies done their job correctly. Now, Minister, you have the Dáil and now the Seanad have voted in favour of a public inquiry. You have put together a process under Justice Gerard Houghton, a scoping exercise. Now, as has been demonstrated by the journalist Michael Clifford, this was not considered necessary when an inquiry was put together for Bill Keneally, the Bill Keneally case, for the IBRC case, or to investigate the recording of phone conversations in Garda stations, any amount of examples. I think that it was very clear that there was the need for a public inquiry was clearly demonstrated and that you should have proceeded directly to that. And I am concerned at the terms of reference that you have outlined for Justice Gerard Houghton. I think you should have consulted with the family before giving them to the Justice, and I will pick up on some of those points again in my supplement.
Shane O'Farrell's mother, Lucia, speak with great sadness and eloquence on prime time last week, and again make, I think, an unanswerable case, Minister, for a full public inquiry. Clearly, both houses of this Oireachtas, we voted for that. We wanted, overwhelmingly, a young man who should still be alive and would have been, had the criminal justice system and certain Gardaí done their jobs properly. And of course, that's the crux of the matter. Zygmantas Jusiska, who was driving the car that killed Shane on the 2nd of August 2011, and just an hour before, of course, he killed him. He had a car that no NCT, no valid insurance. He'd been stopped by the Gardaí and allowed to continue driving. And we know, of course, he'd breached bail 18 times, had 42 previous convictions and a history of heroin abuse. Now, we've had another scoping exercise. We had that in my own constituency, Minister, several times, on the Stardust. We should have gone directly. I know there's an 8-week time frame and so on and so forth, but this is 9 years, 8 years, 9 years for a family looking for justice. Please listen to them and commit to a full public inquiry. Thanks, Chairman.
It's 7.5 years since Shane O'Farrell was killed unnecessarily, and I think it's indisputable with a consensus in this House that Shane O'Farrell would have been still alive here, and probably nobody would have ever heard of Shane O'Farrell if it wasn't a systematic catalogue of failures by all parties, the police and the courts. And what the family have always looked for is accountability, truth and justice. And they are very, very simple narratives. And I don't think by this scoping exercise it will get to that truth. And the truth will only come out through a public inquiry. And I think that will come out after the scoping exercise. It will come out that you need a public inquiry in relation to this unnecessary death of Shane O'Farrell.
Smyth.
Minister, on the 12th of June in 2018, Fianna Fáil introduced a motion to the Dáil here to call for a commission of investigation into the circumstances surrounding the death of Shane O'Farrell in Carrickmacross in County Monaghan back in 2011. Lucia O'Farrell, her husband, her daughters have fought tirelessly to seek justice for their son and brother. Minister, the state has failed them in the manner in which Shane's death was investigated. The state has failed them in the manner in which Shane's death was prosecuted, and the state has continued to fail the O'Farrell family in the manner in which the complaints surrounding the investigation and the prosecution is being handled by GSOC. I am very hopeful, Minister, this is to give you some sense of credit too, that by this scoping inquiry, while we understand from Lucia and her family they were disappointed about a non-engagement, if you like, with them in terms of the terms of reference for the scoping inquiry, but I would be hopeful, Minister, that it does indicate that you will give full support to the Oireachtas vote which happened here last year in terms of the establishment of that public inquiry.
Minister.
I know the circumstances surrounding the tragic and untimely death of Shane O'Farrell are of concern to all members of this House. Indeed, the case has been discussed here on many occasions, along with the subsequent investigations that have taken place into the events surrounding this dreadful accident. Shane O'Farrell was a much-loved son and brother, and his death has clearly been devastating for his family, to whom I once again extend my sincere condolences. The House will recall the outcome of the GSOC criminal investigation of complaints related to the tragedy. Members may not be aware that GSOC recently completed its disciplinary investigation. This has resulted in a recommendation to the Garda Commissioner that disciplinary action be taken in relation to 3 members of An Garda Síochána. Indeed, clearly, this is a matter for the Garda Commissioner and the Garda Commissioner alone. It will now take its proper course. I don't propose to comment further on that. In June 18, Deputy Niamh Smyth has said, the Dáil passed a motion calling for a public inquiry into the death of Shane O'Farrell. The motion called for the actions of the Gardaí, the DPP, the courts, GSOC to be examined as part of such an inquiry. As Minister for Justice and Equality, I am particularly cognizant of the independence of each of these bodies in the criminal justice system. It's imperative that their independence is fully respected. When the Dáil passed its motion, I began examining how we could give effect to the intention of the House without undermining the work of GSOC. My officials began to explore options with the Attorney-General. At the earliest opportunity, following the completion of the GSOC disciplinary investigation at the end of January, I appointed a respected and very experienced former judge of the District Court, Judge Gerard Houghton, to carry out a scoping exercise into the circumstances of the death of Shane O'Farrell, including the criminal prosecution arising from the road traffic incident, the independent review mechanism examination of the case, and the investigations by Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission. I met with the O'Farrell family 2 weeks ago to outline my proposals to them. While they objected to the process of a scoping exercise, they did agree to consider the proposed terms of reference and to engage with Judge Houghton on the terms of reference. I want to thank them for that. I'm aware that Judge Houghton has already contacted the family to commence that very important engagement. It's open, and I stress this, Ceann Comhairle, it's open to Judge Houghton to propose changes to the terms of reference to me. Following his review, Judge Houghton will advise me on any remaining unanswered questions which should be the subject of a further inquiry or investigation, and if so, the most appropriate manner in which that investigation might take place. I want to state, Ceann Comhairle, in very clear terms, neither myself nor the Government is opposed to the possibility of a further inquiry into this case, if that is what Judge Houghton recommends. I have not placed any restriction on Judge Houghton in that regard. I too, as indeed do all of my government colleagues and everybody on this side of the House, wish to see questions answered to the satisfaction of the O'Farrell family. I think we're all in agreement on that, and I say this in the presence of the Chair of the Justice Committee, who has an interest in this issue also. I want to thank the deputies for giving me the opportunity to set out how I propose to proceed in relation to this tragic case, but I too want to deal with it in such a way as to find answers to questions that remain unanswered today.
Thank you, Minister. Now, just 30 seconds for each Deputy O'Leary.
Well, I hope that the judge does revise the terms of reference, because I think there are difficulties with the terms of reference such as they are. They take the approach, yet again, of examine the bits that haven't already been investigated, notwithstanding the fact that the family are already dissatisfied with a number of those investigations, in particular the GSOC investigation. It is a piecemeal approach. Terms 1 and 2, again, as I say, they're very focused on what areas of failure have not already been examined. Terms 3 to 6 very much hinge on those first 2 terms. So I hope they get justice. I hope that this exercise will allow them to get justice, but I also hope that they revise the terms of reference. You should have consulted the family on the terms of references before publishing them.
Well, Minister, I mean, if Judge Houghton came back and asked that you to go straight for a full public inquiry under the 2004 legislation, would you actually do that? I mean, the GSOC investigation, I think it has been very unsatisfactory. It's 4 years, or is it 6 years? And the issues around disciplinary action we know very little about. We need justice for Shane, for his mother, Lucia, for the whole family. There isn't really a need for a scoping inquiry. We should be able to proceed and just go for a commission investigation to this tragic death of this very talented and highly regarded young man, which has decimated his community and his family. Thanks, Ceann.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, as my other colleagues have said, this has become so protracted and so kind of dragged out that it's compelling and compounding the family of the O'Farrell family. And as I said, and as my colleagues said, they've always wanted truth and justice. And hopefully, my question to you, Minister, is if George Houghton, will he compel you, or will you be compelled to call for a public inquiry if he calls for a public inquiry?
Minister, it is clear that the GSOC inquiry has been a total failure for the O'Farrell family. It's been 6 years on since the process began, and the O'Farrell family have no more answers than they did when the process started. The only thing that can be gleaned from the report is that the government needs to step up and establish the Commission of Investigation so that we as a nation learn from this awful tragedy and nothing like this ever happens again.
I want to say quite clearly, that I've listened very carefully to the points raised by Deputies O'Leary and Bruin and Kenny and Deputy Smyth. I've already mentioned the independence of the various criminal justice bodies who are engaged in various aspects of the O'Farrell case. But I think it's absolutely critical that I make it clear that any legal difficulties that may arise in seeking to look at actions by the courts, which are independent under the Constitution, and the Office of the DPP and GSOC, which are both independent under law. We must have regard for the constitutional separation of powers where the courts are concerned. Where the Director of Public Prosecutions is concerned, the law specifically states, and it's designed to prevent inappropriate interference with the office, particularly in cases where there are prosecutorial decisions being concerned. Any inquiry, therefore, must at all times respect these boundaries. I have, as I've mentioned, initiated a scoping exercise to look at the various matters. This is a reasonable and responsible approach to take. There are various precedents where scoping exercises have been carried out in the past, prior to the setting up of inquiries or tribunals. It's good governance to allow a scoping exercise by a legal expert to determine the net issues that may require further examination. Indeed, the exercise on the part of Judge Houghton will also be charged with the responsibility of reviewing changes that have already been made to law and practice and procedure in relation to the administration of bail and bench warrants, and the extent to which they have or have not addressed any gaps in the systems since the death of Shane O'Farrell. So in conclusion, let me reiterate, I'm acutely conscious that at the heart of this tragedy is a family in pain. I'm very much aware of the fact that this family are searching for answers. They have the sympathy and support of the government and everybody in this House. And I want to once again extend my sincere condolences to the O'Farrell family, assure the House and all of the deputies who have raised this issue again today that a process is firmly in place to examine how best to give effect to the Dáil motion that was passed.
Today's consideration of topical issues. We move now to item number 211, a motion regarding confidence in the Minister for Health. I call on Deputy Louise O'Reilly, please, to move the motion.
I move Ceann Comhairle. Ceann Comhairle, the submission of this no confidence motion was not rushed. It is not vindictive or personalised. This motion was submitted because of the scandal of the National Children's Hospital and because the overspend represents for us the final straw. There are those, Minister, in your own party and those in the media who will say that they believe this motion is unfair. When I hear that, I wonder if these people have been living under a rock for the past 3 years. Are they being deliberately obtuse, or are they just being partisan? There are those who will say this motion won't build a hospital, won't reduce a waiting list or get a patient off a trolley, but let's face it, nothing that this government is doing is currently achieving that either. We're not going to stand on the sidelines and let the government off the hook for failing to deliver repeatedly and presiding over a huge waste of taxpayers' money. We were elected to stand up and give voice to our constituents. And at least we are using our voices, unlike the men and women of Fianna Fáil, who proved themselves incapable of understanding political accountability when in government, and who are showing that they either don't understand political accountability or that they are afraid of it here today. What we in Sinn Féin seek to do is to do what is right in the service of political accountability and the future of our health service. The National Children's Hospital overspend is not an isolated incident. It is another in a series of scandals, mistakes and failures that have blighted your ministerial term. You will stand up in a few minutes and you list off what you see as your achievements, but they pale into insignificance when compared to the failures you have presided over for the past almost 3 years. You tweeted today about the repeal of the 8th Amendment and the passing of the Public Health Alcohol Bill. But these are things that you did not do alone, and to try to claim credit for the decades of hard work by pro-choice campaigners is more than a little bit sad, Minister. Even your most ardent supporter could not defend your record in good conscience. How can anyone defend record-breaking levels of patients on trolleys? How can anyone defend failed scoliosis action plans? How can anyone defend chronically understaffed child and adolescent mental health services? How can anyone defend a 27-week wait for the results of cervical smear tests? How can anyone defend record-breaking waiting lists totalling 1 million patients? How can anyone defend forcing nurses and midwives onto the streets to strike for safe staffing? How can anyone defend your role in the cervical check scandal? How can anyone defend the recruitment and retention crisis across the front line of our health service? How can anyone defend thousands of children waiting years for speech and language therapy or waiting years for occupational therapy? How can anyone defend hundreds of older people waiting months for home support services? How can anyone defend the crisis created in general practice? How can anyone defend the spending of €2 billion on agency staff in 8 years? How can anyone defend misleading the Dáil? How can anyone defend knowing of a catastrophic overrun on a capital project and doing nothing about it, saying nothing about it and actively keeping it from colleagues? How can anyone defend the withholding of and drip-feeding of information to TDs and Dáil committees? How can anyone defend reappointing a board who were presiding over the meltdown of the Children's Hospital project without seeking any advice on the performance of that board? How can anyone defend an expected cost overrun on the National Children's Hospital of €450 million? I could go on, but I only have 5 minutes, not 5 hours. The simple fact is that nobody can defend it. No one except you and the opportunistic cowards in Fianna Fáil. It is incompetence and a lack of ability which have brought us here today. Past performance is, I believe, an indicator of future performance. But your past performance makes me certain that you are not up to the job of being Minister for Health. You are out of your depth, Minister. How can we, in good faith, in addition to all of the other failures and the gross level of incompetence and impotence displayed by you as Minister in your handling of the National Children's Hospital, say that we are confident that you are the person to lead the health service? We cannot and we will not. The overrun at the National Children's Hospital materialised on your watch and under your nose, but there was another person involved further back in this project whose role in this cannot be ignored. Who agreed to the doomed two-stage procurement strategy just for political expediency so that he or another Fine Gael minister could cut the ribbon? It was your predecessor in health, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. In 2014, it was recognised in a procurement strategy report that this approach was untested in the state and that it carried significant risks. That report stated that added pressure would be put on the project's design team, which could lead to a poor quality price. All of the available evidence pointed out that we would be where we are today, and yet Mr Varadkar, the politician who governs by optics, took decisions so the ribbon could be cut early. He didn't do this for the children of the state, he did it for himself and for Fine Gael. And on your watch, you continued in exactly the same vein. Minister, if the tables were turned, and if it was I or any other opposition TD who were in your shoes who had presided over the litany of scandals that you have presided over, would you vote confidence in us? There's not a snowball's chance in hell that you would, and there's not a snowball's chance in hell that we will vote confidence in you.
Our healthcare system is in crisis, as every day brings new headlines which tell of the litany of failures inherent in the system. We've had a series of scandals, including that of cervical check. And over the course of that debacle, the bravery of women like Emma Vic-Fahuna has shone a light directly on the incompetence of the Minister for Health. That scandal continues with the backlog of tests and a wait time of some 7 months for results. We have a children's hospital with runaway costs. up to €500 million over budget, money that will have to come from somewhere, from taxpayers and from other capital projects. For this Minister, for this Government, for Fianna Fáil, patience on trolleys is the norm. It's acceptable to you. It's so acceptable, in fact, Minister, that you deemed it appropriate this afternoon to take to Twitter, to puff out your chest and to declare, bring it on. Well, you Minister, are failing. And that is very clear. Everyday TDs from across the chamber get to their feet to set out the latest crisis. Even Fianna Fáil do it. Even Micheál Martin does it, albeit to throw shapes and play to the camera. But when the camera is off, it's business as usual for Fianna Fáil. Supply and confidence has undermined and discredited the political process. The essential role of opposition is to hold the government of the day to account, to advocate for those without a voice, to call out failing ministers and failing policies, to demand better. But Fianna Fáil, in their supply and confidence agreement, has abdicated responsibility and has betrayed the electorate. The simple fact is that the Minister is incapable of doing his job, and yet he remains in office. He believes he is untouchable. The crisis and scandals mount, and hard-working people pay the price, quite literally. The leader of Fianna Fáil has listed the failings of the Health Minister, but by his actions he will support him, he will protect him, and Fianna Fáil will protect Fine Gael. The leader of Fianna Fáil says he will support the Minister in the national interest. Well, let me tell you, it is never in the national interest to keep a failing minister in place. The price is too high, not only in the Children's Hospital, but in hospitals and doctors' surgeries right across the state. The leader of Fianna Fáil tells us that this is done to avoid an election as Brexit looms. The Taoiseach has said that there will be no election before Brexit. There is no threat of an election, and yet the Minister remains. And all of this because of so-called supply and confidence. A deal that covers the blushes of a Fianna Fáil leader for giving the government a blank cheque whilst pretending to act as opposition. Sleeving politics is now the order of the day in the Dáil. This is a coalition in all but name. The Taoiseach certainly has the measure of the leader of Fianna Fáil, because he knows that Micheál Martin will fall into line once pressure is applied. So this isn't about Brexit. This isn't about avoiding an election. The national interest is not served by retaining a minister who is clearly failing. Today, supply and confidence is exposed. It's not about stability, it's about stagnation. It's a grubby deal by the political establishment to control both government and opposition all at the same time. And its legacy is seen on waiting lists, on trolley counts, and in families struggling to make ends meet. The question to Micheál Martin is a simple one. Do you have confidence in the Minister? You either do or you don't. An abstention is a confidence vote in the Minister and a con trick on the people. And unfortunately this evening, Ceann Comhairle, we will witness political cowardice and hypocrisy of the highest and an unparalleled order.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. There are 1.73 billion reasons why not to have confidence in the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board. Not my words, but the words of Fianna Fáil Health spokesperson Stephen Donnelly. There are indeed 1.73 billion reasons not to have confidence in the Minister with the ultimate responsibility for what Deputy Donnelly calls the mugging of the Irish public to the tune of over €1 billion. That Minister is Simon Harris. Our health service is in crisis. 442 people are lying on trolleys across the state. This is despite numerous guarantees that this would end. Half of the new hospital beds promised for winter are still not open, and that includes 8 in St Columkille's Hospital. Our GPs are protesting, cervical cancer scandal, and the list goes on, putting out statements by the dozen, criticising the many problems within the health service will not fix it. That Minister Harris presides over, and keeping him in office will not solve the many problems. It is quite clear, Minister, you are completely out of your depth. The real national sabotage is sitting on the fence on this motion of no confidence and keeping the Minister for Chaos in office and ensuring accountability and the possibility of change are just words in the view of Fianna Fáil. The Fianna Fáil spokesperson for Health, Stephen Donnelly, previously asked the question why no one has been fired for the huge cost increase in building the National Children's Hospital. Well, let me tell you, the answer to that question lies firmly in the hands of Fianna Fáil here this evening. So it's now time for Fianna Fáil to put up or shut up on this issue once and for all.
Hear, hear.
Minister Harris, this no-confidence motion is every bit as much about your predecessor, the current Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, and his predecessor, the current Senator James Riley, as it is about you. It is first and foremost about Fine Gael's ideology towards healthcare delivery and citizens' entitlement to it. The HSE as it stands is not fit for purpose. Fine Gael said this in 2011 in their 5-point plan. You said you would eliminate long waiting lists, end the unfair public-private two-tier system and replace it with a universal health insurance system. 8 years later, these words ring very, very hollow for all those who have suffered, are suffering and will continue to suffer in this shambolic health system. Indeed, it is too late for those who have passed on, and I specifically think of Emma Vicfahuna and other brave women here this afternoon. Recent and current issues that I have been working on and that have proved to me why I should have no confidence in you and in this government as a whole include the cervical cancer scandal, the urgent need of approval of Spinraza, the in loco parentis clause, the unprecedented waiting lists for children for assessment of needs, the impending closure of services for the Irish Deaf Society, the failure to ratify the optional protocol to the UNCRPD and proposed cuts to staffing levels in all of the major disability umbrella organisations. It isn't only the major issues, and let me tell you that I also add the commitments that you have made to me personally and have reneged on, including your agreement to meet with representatives of Deborah Island who represent children suffering from epidermolysis bullosa or EB. Your 5-point plan also said that hospital funding will be radically overhauled so that the money will follow the patient. Well, something radical has certainly taken place. A radical increase in the cost of the National Children's Hospital from what Leo Varadkar said would be 650 million to currently 1.7 billion, with an inevitable further increase. Minister, I have no confidence in you to deliver for people or for patients, and I have no confidence in your government.
This motion, I believe, is in reality a statement of fact. Dáil Éireann has no confidence in the Minister for Health. It will be, procedurally, a tight vote relatively in any event. But all the evidence suggests that the vast majority of those abstaining do not have confidence either. The Fianna Fáil deputies will cry Brexit prevents us from doing anything, even though practically every statement they make implies that he should go. Deputy Donnelly lists the myriad failings practically daily. Brexit does not and cannot mean that government and government ministers get a free pass, get a blank cheque in the meantime. And that is what Fianna Fáil and Micheál Martin is facilitating here. The Taoiseach should, by rights, recognise the failings himself in and of himself. It is the role of the opposition, and it appears all the actual opposition parties agree, to hold government to account. Indeed, as Fine Gael used to do when they were in opposition, tabling or supporting motions of no confidence at minimum once a year in the Fianna Fáil government between 2004 and 2011. And rightly so, some of them ministers were as bad as years. This motion is not about an election. It is about a crisis in health which gets more and more out of control each day, with record waiting lists exacerbating and drawing out a dispute with nurses, and more specifically a 450 million overrun in the Children's Hospital that, despite what the Taoiseach says, will have real implications for major projects in health and elsewhere.
My colleagues have adequately outlined the many reasons why Simon Harris should be removed as Minister for Health. But unless some of Fianna Fáil's TDs manage to grow a spine in the next half hour, he will stay in this position with their blessing, under Micheál Martin's instructions. Why would Micheál Martin want to keep Simon Harris in position? Why does he not want accountability? Maybe it's because he simply does not believe in accountability. This is Deputy Micheál Martin's 30th year in the Dáil, and over that time he has stood firmly with Charlie Haughey and Bertie Ahern as evidence mounted over corrupt payments. He did not seek accountability then, and he doesn't seek it now. During his 14 years as Minister, time and time again he ducked and dived, avoiding accountability at every turn. Whether it was a legal nursing home charges scandal which cost the state $486 million, when asked does he bear any responsibility for this, Micheál Martin replied, "No, I do not." Or his cronyism in appointing board members to the Irish Blood Transfusion Board at a critical juncture when public confidence was shaken following the hepatitis C scandal, or overseeing the false expenses scandals, when, despite being aware of gross waste of public funds, he took no action to stop it.
What about
the comparison?
What about the 6,000 you got in 2004?
The comparison with recent scandals involving Minister Harris does not need to be expanded upon. In each case, Micheál Martin blamed officials, civil servants and advisers. He never took responsibility for scandals as a minister. The simple reality is that Micheál Martin does not believe in accountability in public life, nor does Fianna Fáil. Indeed, his primary legacy is the HSE itself, a body he established, in which he managed to translate his own personal failings into an institution of systematic failings, a body that continues to affect every man, woman and child in this state, an organisation which every minister has had behind since they have come into power. No motion, the motion we are debating here tonight, seeks to hold Minister Harris to account for his failures. However, he may quite reasonably look across the chamber at Fianna Fáil, at Deputy Micheál Martin and others as the source of many of his current woes. Tonight, it looks like Fianna Fáil will again help provide cover for a failing minister. He will again scupper the attempts by a real opposition to provide accountability in Irish public life. Micheál Martin should go, and so should Minister Harris. It's time for accountability. It is time for accountability, and it is time to realise that the Irish people deserve better.
That's a raw nerve of Fianna Fáil.
Please, can we have order for Deputy Ellis?
Minister, it's hard to know where to begin with the failures of this minister. Many have been outlined in detail by my colleagues, but I wonder if he is actually paying attention to what people are saying. Because if his tweets this morning show anything, it's the same old arrogance of this government propped up by Fianna Fáil. Tweeting "bring it on" with regard to a debate on a vote of no confidence in you is the height of arrogance. You would think that with so many documented failures in the health service for which you are directly responsible, you would have shown a little bit of humility. I would like you to come to Dublin North West and show that same arrogance to the elderly, mothers and disabled, and see what they will say. In your arrogance, you also tried to manage the news around the catastrophic failure in the overspend on the Children's Hospital. Don't try to shut down debate across the country on the cost of this overspend to local communities. How dare the Taoiseach suggest that those who raise concerns and fears that health projects in their areas will be delayed or not go ahead are being unscrupulous or insincere. I am sincerely concerned that health projects in my constituency.
Your time is up. Will you please resume your seat? Deputy.
And I won't stop raising concerns. And I won't have you, Taoiseach, or your minister accuse me of being unscrupulous.
Deputy, will you resume your seat? Please resume your seat. Now, could you all just calm down a little bit, okay? Taoiseach, please.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. I think without doubt being Minister for Health is one of the toughest jobs in government. I believe it's also... I believe it's also one of the most important jobs in the country because it affects so many lives. It's also good experience for higher office. It helps you to understand what a crisis is and what it is not, and how to deal with many at the same time. It's noteworthy, Ceann Comhairle, that 3 of the 4 main party leaders in the Dáil are former Ministers for Health. The other, who is proposing this motion, has never held ministerial office and has no real understanding